We doing this?
Yes.
Are we ready? Okay. Hello and welcome to the My Dietitian Journey Podcast. I'm your co-host and producer, Adam, and of course with me, as always, as usual, star of the show, cream of the crop, Felicia Peraza of PerazaNutrition.com, Peraza Nutrition Facebook, Twitter, YouTube, Instagram.
Same with My Dietitian Journey.
And My Dietitian Journey.
Yes.
Whoops-a-daisy. We are here to talk about some My Dietitian Journey stuff, some things that budding and aspiring private practice dietitians or dietitians of any flavor would probably need to know to be successful in a private practice and maybe some other scenarios too.
Yes.
All right, so what are we talking about today?
So we're going to talk about how to set your fees in private practice.
Riveting.
Yes.
Exciting stuff.
Finance.
Yeah.
Not really.
All right, so well, I guess we want to jump into it straight away here. Let's where do you start with an hourly rate? Like, assume you're billed hourly, you charge by the hour or the minute or the segment of an hour. Well, how's that all work?
Yeah. So the first, with setting your fees, you want to start by setting your hourly rate. And this is actually going to just make everything else easier. So when you're thinking about what you should charge for your hourly rate, you want to start by researching other dietitians in your area and see what they're charging. So if you're just starting out, you might not want to charge something that's really high and out of the norm for your area, unless you maybe have a specialty that might warrant it. But you want to consider your demographics, and you don't want to necessarily lowball yourself too much, but you don't want to charge such a high price point that people wouldn't necessarily charge or purchase your services.
So gauge the area, go by the normal standard prices currently in the area. You know, if you're selling apples and they sell for 69 cents a pound, you don't want to sell your apples for $40 a pound. You don't want to sell them for 2 cents a pound. Someone's just going to flip them.
Exactly.
But those are apples. You can't flip a service. Either way, you don't want to undercharge. You don't want to undervalue yourself. Gauge the market, see what other people are charging.
Yeah.
Pretty standard, intuitive.
Yeah. And you also want to think about, factoring in then your expertise and your education. So when I first started out in private practice, I didn't have my master's at the time yet when I was a dietitian.
She does now, though.
I do now. And I also wasn't a personal trainer and wasn't a health coach. And so I kind of started a little bit lower. So it was just slightly under what other dietitians might have been charging in my area. And then I started to bump up the fees every year when I had more education, more experience in the private practice setting, and then also with the certifications and then getting my master's. And so I kind of added to that because I basically brought more value.
Yeah, and you're going to have to be able to judge that as you go, as you accumulate more experience and more credentials. It's going to be valuable for you to sort of reevaluate ongoing. All right, I'm bringing more value. I should charge more.
Yeah.
You would want to do that in any profession, essentially. Get what you're worth. That's hard to do when you're first starting out, because a lot of times I think people feel like they're lucky to even have their own business, and it's kind of hard to convince yourself that I bring value and I need to charge more. Some people are a little too gun shy when it comes to charging what they're actually worth.
Yeah, and
what was your progression like with that?
So when I first started, I charged probably too low, I guess, at this point. And I started to think about, not only what other dietitians were charging, but also what went into that hourly rate.
Are we allowed to talk about numbers here?
We could talk about numbers. The only thing that we won't be able to talk about is reimbursement from insurances, which we're going to talk about later. But
your fees and what you had.
My fees, absolutely. Okay. It's on my website anyway.
It is currently, but do you remember what you started out charging?
I started with, I think, $70 an hour, which if you think about it, you might think, well, that sounds kind of high versus if you're you're working for somebody else.
It's like you're working per hour or something.
Yeah, but it's really not when you think about all the stuff that kind of goes into, private practice and being your own boss, the time that you can't bill for and the time that you're not necessarily getting paid for with continuing ed and, when you're emailing people or when you're checking things and marketing yourself.
A lot more. There's tons that goes into it.
Yeah.
It's not paid hour for hour like you would be getting paid at a job.
Yeah.
There's tons of stuff you're doing behind the scenes.
Exactly. And so I started with about $70 an hour, and then I started to bump that up. So I went to $100 an hour, and then
that's a huge jump. What caused that? Let's pause for a second. $30 more. That's you upped your rates by 40%.
Yes.
What prompted that? Why?
So part of what that was one, being in private practice for actually a little over a year was where I started to kind of up the prices. And then also I started to look at what other dietitians were charging in the area more so. So I did some like initial research as to what people were charging, but one thing we'll talk about is not everybody puts their rates on their website. But I also got into more networking groups with dietitians to kind of ask what people are pretty open about it sometimes when you talk about it, which I think it helps the field to know, what would be good to charge and stuff. So I started with the 70, and then as I kind of got more experience, I talked to other dietitians and I kind of got into it a little bit, started to realize, well, actually I'm doing way more. So I feel like it should be a little bit higher. And then I bumped it up to $100 an hour. And then now my rates are at $180, which might seem like a lot. But now I have not only the specialties to kind of go along with it, but I also niche down a lot more, which we talked about in a previous podcast. So I feel like I bring a more kind of specific, value.
And just to clarify, that rate, $180 an hour, that is what you set as your fee. But that's not necessarily what you would get from insurance companies. That's a whole other can of worms. We're going to get into that, right?
Yeah, we're going to get into that. So that's like my flat hourly rate. And why it's really helpful to kind of set that hourly rate is, as we're going to talk about today, that can actually you can use that as a baseline for what else you might charge. So you might think about group classes, you might think about like webinars or cooking classes, and being able to have like kind of a general idea of what your base rate might be, and then building from that can be really helpful.
Okay, so I just want to clarify a little bit. When you made the jump from $70 to $100 an hour, it was mainly because the 70 was too low in the first place.
Yeah.
You had been into it for over a year at that point. You kind of knew what you were doing.
Yep.
And you started networking with other dietitians in that time and discovered what other people were charging, which is part of what made you feel comfortable enough to make the jump to $100 an hour.
Absolutely.
Now, I'm assuming at some point you didn't just go right to 180.
No, yeah.
All right, so do you remember any of the lily pads that you jumped across to get to 180 from 100?
Yeah, so I went from 100 to 120 and then to 150. The 180 was, actually, I think it was not necessarily last year.
Tell us why you went from 100 to 120. What happened?
So more experience. I also found that the $100 an hour was also too low. And so I knew that the rates were a little lower than what I really should have been charging, and I just didn't feel comfortable yet charging that. And I also didn't necessarily have a big client base, so I was kind of a little, and this is something that can come up, is a little afraid to charge it because I wasn't sure if people were going to want to pay it. And so then I was like, I don't know, should I be charging this much? Will people pay for it? And then that's kind of how I started to like get more comfortable with it when people did, accept the rates, but also I built other services around that for those who might not be able to afford maybe that 1 hour rate for a session, and having like lower price points, which made me feel comfortable about charging what I do now.
But you went from 120 to 150.
Yeah.
Did anything specific prompt that? Was it you getting your personal trainer cert? Was it, something else?
Yeah. So the personal trainer cert was what put me, about that time frame was when it put me to the 150. And then the 180 was actually a little bit more recent. So within the last maybe year or so. And that was after I already had the personal training certification, but I also just overall had way more experience. I was teaching. And so I had a lot more, I would just say experience overall, not only as a private practice dietitian, but also in, the plant-based space and, what I brought to the table, what people were getting value from the session. So,
well, you got your personal trainer cert, you got that health coaching thing.
Yeah.
And you dug into more stuff. Like you dug into a lot more techniques in terms of counseling and getting more out of the session for the client. Yeah. So there's stuff that's explicit that you got in terms of like actual certifications and continuing ed credits. And then there's stuff that you did on your own that you just knew for yourself, I'm better at this now from knowing this. And the timeline, you started $70 an hour. How many years ago was that?
That was when I first started my practice, where I really didn't have many clients, but it was back in 2014. And then 2015, I kind of had the same rates. I think it was around 2015, 2016 when I bumped it up to the 100. And then after I got my master's, around that time frame was like, and that was probably, I guess that was now 4 years ago at this point, about 4 years ago. And so it was kind of like, every year I was kind of about that.
Like every year or two you would bump your rates. And a disclaimer here, should have did this at the top. this is for entertainment purposes only. This is not legal advice. This is not, I don't want to get sued. We don't want to get sued.
Yes.
It's just entertainment. You're going to have to dig into your own local market and determine these things, and you're going to have to do some digging on your own. That said, we're trying to provide a good reference point here for someone who doesn't know anything about this stuff.
Yeah.
This is going to be a nice jumping off point, and it's going to give you a basic idea of the progression for Felicia and what it might be for another dietitian starting out, and how she bumped up her rates and is more than double per hour her rate now compared to where she started.
Yeah.
So I wanted to give an outline of the journey there and how you went from, it's your RD journey.
Yeah.
Come
And
on.
this is,
That was a joke. It's the podcast is called My RD Journey.
Yeah,
Let's be real. I'm tying it in here. But you started in 2014 and it's 2021.
Yeah.
7 years.
Yeah.
It's a long time.
Oh, wow. That is
It's a while. You're old. You're ancient.
Wow. Okay.
She's 30, guys.
I am 30.
She's not that old, but she's officially an adult now. I think 30 is the new 20.
It is. I agree.
Whatever that means. Okay. Yeah, of course you would agree. You're 30.
And one thing to think about too, and just, I mentioned I started my private practice in 2014. I didn't start just in private practice. I'm not sure if we even mentioned this. I think we mentioned this on
Well, I mean, you were part-time. You were working full-time at another job.
Exactly. So I had other experience in other areas too. So if you're getting into private practice and you've been working for many years, you might start your rates at kind of higher. So that might be something to consider too. Again,
weren't you out of college for like a year or two at that point? You had just finished your
2014 was when I actually became a dietitian, that May. And then that's when I started my practice, which involved my terrible website and one client. And then 2015 was when I really started.
2015 was when you started taking insurance, I guess?
I started the insurance process. I had more self-paying clients. And then I also, the end of 2015 to 2016 was when it kind of took off, when I started taking more insurance clients.
Okay, so now that your rate is $180 an hour, a lot of your clients are reimbursed through insurance.
Yes.
That's how you get paid.
Yes.
How many of those clients are about? Are we skipping way ahead here? Am I
That's
just
fine.
all right? I'm trying to think about things that are the most valuable up front. Just how many of your clients are self-pay versus insurance right now?
So for nutrition at this point, well, just across the board, all my clients, probably about 90% of them are insurance. So they are using their insurance and I get paid from the insurance company.
Okay, so that's good to know. So you're setting your rate, but you're only really getting that full 180 from self-pay.
Yes.
I guess. But that rate that you set still does affect your reimbursement rate for insurance. I'm going way out of line here in terms of our timeline here.
We'll just kind of
we can circle back to this in a little bit.
Yeah, just one thing before we kind of jump back is to just say that when you are billing insurance, you are still going to charge your customary rate. So you're still going to have the rate that we're talking about, with your setting your hourly rate and what your fee is. You're still going to want to set that because that's considered your usual customary rate. So that is what you would bill for the insurance. Now, what you get back as a provider is not necessarily going to be your exact rate, but that's what we're going to talk about.
Okay. And then when you first started, did you have more self-paying clients, and then did it shift over to insurance as you went?
Yeah, so I had more self-paying clients for individual services. So when I first started, I was only doing nutrition counseling. I wasn't doing personal training or anything, but I was also doing some group class stuff too. So that's actually a really good thing to kind of incorporate for clients who might not be able to maybe pay your self-paying rate, or your hourly rate, I should say. If
they're not covered through insurance.
Yeah, if they're not covered through insurance. So if they're paying out of pocket, group classes could be great. But that was something I was doing a little bit more of. So I was doing support group type stuff, and then individual sessions, one-on-one sessions. But I had a lot more. My services looked way different than they do now. I had hour sessions, I had 30-minute sessions, and I had 15-minute sessions. So I was trying to kind of break down that fee a little bit more for clients who were paying out of pocket. Again, this is pre when I was accepting insurance. So. And
you still do a free consultation call or something for initial client.
Yep.
Contact.
So for all of my initial clients, and for dietitians too, which I often get a lot of dietitians who schedule a free, session with me, and it's just a 20-minute call. And for the nutrition piece with new clients, it's a time for them to get to know me, but also we go over their insurance. We go through, what package or service might be best for them, what the process looks like, and they can kind of ask some initial questions because most people have never worked with a dietitian to really know what to expect in that process.
Okay, so we briefly touched on packages and talking about like how that can help clients who are self-pay but can't quite afford that solo hourly one-on-one rate. So how do you develop a package? What goes into that exactly?
So it kind of depends on how you might want to structure it. So when I first started, and actually what's on my website now, I have like a bundle of nutrition services. And so there's one package on my website that's called like a wellness revamp. And so it includes fitness and nutrition. But when I first started, I did a 1-hour nutrition consult and then 2 30-minute follow-ups and then like 2 15-minute sessions. And so I also kind of scaled down the cost of the rates a little bit because people were paying up front. And for some clients, I split that. So they had 2 payments instead of paying just 1. But you can really structure it however you want. Usually people will bundle sessions and then other like freebie type things. So they'll include like unlimited email or texts or unlimited something, and then maybe a meal plan or sample handouts or things like that. They'll kind of bundle lots of other kinds of things in with it outside of just the counseling session itself. When you're setting your packages up, you just want to make sure you're very clear about what's included in them. What people are getting from the actual package. Is it one 1-hour session? Is it 2 30-minute sessions? Like exactly what you are creating with that package so they know exactly what to expect.
Yeah, important to be concise in terms of what people are getting when they're paying money for it. You don't want to mislead anyone. You don't want there to be any confusion. The last thing you want is a paying client to pay you and then they expect more for what they paid, and you have to go through terms and like, well, here's what it gets uncomfortable, and it's better to just sort of eliminate the chance of that as much as possible and be as concise and clear in your ad copy, I guess, as you can. Do you do discounts or anything?
So I don't personally do discounts for like service type stuff, and you just have to be careful because sliding scale discounts based on like financial hardship or ability are legal in many states, but there's qualifications for what would be like a sliding scale discount based upon the federal poverty guidelines. And then you also can't necessarily offer discounts to like Medicare clients for services that are covered. So you just have to be very careful. So I would check your local state guidelines. And then also this is again where a group might come in, instead of doing like a discounted 1-hour session, you might think about offering like coaching, smaller little bits. So like 20-minute coaching call instead of 1-hour session, or maybe a group support group. So you can maybe charge the individual less money, but you're still getting that bundle from all of the clients that you have.
Okay. So, all right. We talked about the numbers, and maybe some people will be surprised that you're as open as you were with how much you charged, why you charged more, and what you charge now. You display it on your site, but not everyone does that.
No.
Obviously, I assume it's obvious that your opinion is that you should post your rates. Why do you think that? And is there a reason to not post your rates?
So I personally, I believe that people should post their rates. I hate when I'm looking for something and trying to find, the service and I can't figure out how much it costs, because then I can't really make an informed decision about it. And so I want my clients to know what they're getting, what the price is, to know what it is ahead of time, to be very transparent. And if people really want or need the service, they're going to pay for it. Also, as long as you, again, are spelling out what they're getting, what comes with an initial session or package, what's included. And this actually saves me a bunch of time, because for one point, I actually didn't post my rates, and then I would have people email me about what the rates were. People would call and ask the rates, and then it was like a whole conversation about what the fees were and charges. And so it actually saved me a ton of time to just put the rates on my website, and then that way people know exactly what to expect. So I find there's a lot of pros to it. The cons, and what I hear from with others who choose not to post their rates, is that they feel as though a client might be turned off by how much they charge and then not want to invest in the service because they feel like it's too expensive and they might not value the service that you're offering. And then you lose a client. And so they feel as though if you are able to kind of talk to the client and upsell them on it. Or I don't even know if that's upsell, but talk to the client, you can get
just
them.
sell them on it, really.
Yeah.
You're just selling them on it at that point.
Exactly.
See, that to me seems like slimy marketing tactic. Like, I think it's better to be transparent. You're not trying to fool people here.
No, that's exactly.
And, the thing, too, to consider is that, unlike you just said, and probably this is going to be the case for most dietitians, 90% of your clients are insurance pay.
Mm-hmm.
So they're going to not be paying out of pocket anyway. They're paying into their benefits, whether or not they see you. So that cost to them is basically nothing. I mean, they're already paying for it. They're just not utilizing it if they're not yet seeing a dietitian. So they're paying through their benefits package.
Mm-hmm.
They're not paying you out of pocket. They're not
Exactly.
paying you your rate on the site. So it doesn't even apply to most of your clients.
Yeah.
I would make the case that you showing your rates pretty much doesn't hurt you at all, and it helps other dietitians who are coming across your site to see what the rate should be.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, who do you think is looking at your rates more? Other dietitians examining your site to see what they should base their rates on, or clients that pay out of pocket? I mean, it's probably more clients, but still, very few clients of yours are paying out of pocket to begin with.
Yeah.
So why be so shady and weird about your rate?
Exactly. And it's so funny because a lot of times I'll have clients who, like, if we're not sure, or if they have a plan where don't really have good insurance coverage for nutrition services, they'll just say on the first call with me, they're like, well, whatever it is, I'll pay because I need this. And so, most of the clients that I work with that end up paying out of pocket for anything, or even end up buying something else outside of what their insurance covers, they're kind of, the way they're thinking about it is, I need this and I'm going to pay what it is because I need this. And it's something that, it's for my health and for my wellness. And so, I don't know, I really, really feel like this, having it on the website and being more transparent helps you, to actually get more clients.
It just seems like the better move overall to me too. I hate when I'm looking at something, and especially if it's an internet-based product and it's like an information product and I'm not sure if I want it, and there's like a mile of ad copy, and at the very bottom of the site they finally tell you how much it costs, or you have to click through, and it's like, dude, I get it, this is what I want. Probably I want to know how much it costs, because it could cost $5 or $50. I don't know, I don't have a reference point for the price here. Show me how much it costs, and then I have to dig through to figure it out.
Yeah.
Or I have to get to another page. It's infuriating. I hate it.
Yeah.
That's me personally. That has nothing to do with this.
But it's a turnoff, especially, and I've done that when I'm looking for for myself, for services, even for my business, is I want to be able to shop around and compare and see what this one offers versus this one, and to look at the website, and then it's like they're trying to, you get this and this, and I'm like, what is the actual rate? You're right. It's infuriating.
I hate it. I hate it so much. Okay. So for fees and accepting insurance, do your rates change? Or we're gonna dig into a little bit more technical stuff here, stuff that you should know in terms of how this all plays in with insurance and how your fee is affected by or affects the way insurance companies pay you out.
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah.
So do your rates change when you accept insurance?
So your base rate, so your hourly rate, whatever your customary rate is, does not change. However, what you get reimbursed by the insurance company will change based on what's called your fee schedule. So this is your contract rate. It's a list of fees that's used by the insurance. And basically, dietitians are considered fee-for-service providers. So we basically have the service. You see a client, and then you bill for it to the insurance company, and they reimburse you. So each insurance company has a separate list of fees, and this is in the fee schedule. And this is for all healthcare providers, so not just dietitians. And we're going to talk about the codes that would apply for dietitians.
We're going to talk about the codes
that
are specific to dietitians.
Yeah.
That you'll have to enter into the insurance website.
Yeah,
okay.
So we'll talk about that a little bit. But the fee schedule, you can ask for that during your contracting phase of becoming a provider for the individual insurance company.
And you should.
You should.
And that's something you've had a problem with in the past, I believe.
Yes. And it might take a couple asks, and you need to kind of push sometimes to get the fee schedule, but sometimes they'll give you a sample one. And I think we might have mentioned this before. That's not for dietitians. You have to ask for your particular codes, which is what we're going to talk about in just a couple minutes.
But you have to maybe push the insurance company to actually give you the appropriate fee schedule for you, for a dietitian.
Yes.
And you need that in the contracting phase when you're setting things up to accept that insurance company's reimbursement.
Yes. And Medicare, we're going to link in the description or in the
show notes description if you're on YouTube or podcast.
We're going to link Medicare does list the fee schedule for dietitians, which some insurances do. Some insurance companies base it off of the Medicare fee schedule, and that is actually public. So you could search for fees for dietitians. This can even give you a starting point too for setting your own rates.
Medicare is public, like it's the government insurance.
Yes.
So, there's Medicare and then there's like all the private insurance companies.
Yes. Yeah. So the private insurance companies don't have the fee schedules posted on their website. You'd have to be a provider to know that information. And I can't talk about, and once you are a provider, you're not allowed to share that information, and you're not supposed to anyway.
You'll be arrested by the insurance police.
Yeah. Will avoid your contract. But Medicare is on the website. So we're going to
It'll void your contract if you talk about the fees?
Yeah, it's like a provision in the contract.
It's kind of a big deal, I guess, then. You don't want to do that. Not recommended here.
Not recommended.
The official stance of My RD Journey is that you do not discuss the fee schedule to void your contract. That is our official take on that. I know it's a hot take. Shouldn't do it.
Also, something else that kind of leads us into this is that if I mentioned, you're going to have your usual customary rate, so what you're going to charge the insurance company. However, this may not be what the insurance company pays you. So when you become a provider for an insurance company, you're basically contracting with them for a set fee schedule, like I mentioned, which again, generally is going to be less, maybe, depending on what your rates are, less than what you might charge. However, you cannot, generally speaking, you cannot then turn around and bill the client for what the insurance doesn't pay. So an example is if you bill the insurance company $200, they only reimburse you $150. You can't turn around and then present your client with a bill for $50. It's called balance billing. And there are some states where it's completely illegal for all providers. There's some states where there's a little kind of more loose guidelines. But most of the time, even if it's technically illegal, most of the insurance companies will have a clause in their contract that says you cannot do that.
I mean, either way, you just can't do it. Pretty much, you just can't do it.
Yeah.
I mean, I don't know why there needs to be so much explanation.
Yes.
If your rate is $200, but you agree and you sign up for the insurance company and what they pay is $150, and that's what's on your fee schedule, right? That would be on your fee schedule. If your rate is $200, the contracted rate is $150, that's it. That's what it is. But I assume then, okay, so say you're, just for the sake of argument, your rate is $200. And then when you're starting things up with an insurance company, do you present them with your rate, which then influences how much you get reimbursed? Or is there sort of like a flat reimbursement across the insurance company and it doesn't even matter what your rate is?
So it gets tricky. And that's where it depends on the insurance company. And with most of them, they have a flat fee schedule rate that they pay all dietitians. So it doesn't really matter. They will generally increase their rates over time or change their rates over time. And that applies for all dietitians, which is also why it's important to bill your usual and customary rate, because they may increase their rates. And then if you're billing just to the fee schedule, you're not going to get that increase.
So it's wise to not bill under the fee schedule.
Exactly.
Because then you're not getting all of what you're worth there.
No, exactly not. But
again, this is for entertainment purposes only. This is purely for entertainment purposes. Yes. No legal advice here being given in any official capacity, purely for entertainment purposes only. I want to say that off the top. Felicia is not a lawyer. She is not an expert in finance per se.
No, just for fun.
Yeah, this is for funsies, guys. All right, sorry, what were we saying?
So with your fee schedule, I don't want to say you might never have success, but it's kind of hard to negotiate with an insurance company to get a higher fee schedule when you're just become a provider. That said, it may happen, but a lot of times insurance companies won't negotiate with you until you're already a provider for them. And this might be a year, 2 years, or 3 years into the contract. So this is something to ask, actually, the insurance company, is when they do negotiations, and if you can negotiate for your fee schedule rates in the beginning, or if you're able to negotiate a certain time period. So I had one insurance company that you have to wait 3 years after becoming a provider to negotiate your rates. And there's a whole process that's involved with it. And then I had another insurance company that was every year, but at a certain time frame where you can negotiate your rates. So it varies, but you have to ask the question. They won't just tell you.
Cool. All right. So you have to figure that out. Sort of after you become a provider, you can negotiate. You don't have room to negotiate before you become a provider. Unfortunately, it's not really how it goes.
Yeah, not generally. And I mean, you can, again, try. The worst they say is no, but you could certainly try, and then you have the information, you know what to expect. But generally speaking, they won't really negotiate with you until after you're already a provider and after you actually start seeing clients too, which,
Okay, so all right, you set your rate. Mm-hmm. You become a provider for an insurance company.
Yep.
You have to do a bunch of stuff that's a whole other conversation. But you have to do some stuff to then bill them.
Yes.
What do you do? What are the basics? Or what do dietitians need to know about that?
Yeah. So there's a lot to know about insurance billing, but just some of the basics that I'm going to talk about. So the first, and these are things that when I first started to bill insurances, I had no clue what these even meant. So CPT codes. So current procedural terminology codes. These are ones that you're going to want to know. These basically describe the procedures and the services provided by physicians, healthcare providers, and dietitians. So for dietitians in particular, there's 3 CPT codes that matter that are for medical nutrition therapy. So the first is 97802. This is basically an initial assessment. So it's individual, face-to-face, and it's billed in 15-minute units.
Okay, just to clarify, because if someone doesn't know the first thing about this stuff. So these codes are what when you bill an insurance company, mm-hmm. you end up going to like either a platform or their site or whatever it is.
Yep.
You are going in to bill a client. There's probably a button you click, boom, bill clients here. And then you open up a form, right? Mm-hmm. A form opens up. And there are a bunch of fields to populate.
Yes.
And I imagine there are some that are like drop-down menus, some that are just like enter a thing here, mm-hmm. and then you'll have to input things to make sure that everything is going through the proper channels. Now, if you've never had to justify costs or expenses to a company at a large scale before, this is all going to be very new to you, and it's going to seem really stupid because it's like you have to quantify very specifically what you did and what category it's being charged in, because at the end of the day, the insurance company, probably like any other big company, is going to have a bunch of costs on their books and they have people to answer to. Mm-hmm. Everyone needs to know, all right, why did everything cost as much as it did and exactly how much money went where.
Yes.
So they need to know that information to properly allocate their costs to the proper channels. Geez, when I was like working in management and I expensed something for like, I expensed decorations to decorate like the cafeteria for a party or something like that. I literally used a company credit card and then I had to expense it in the proper channel. And if I didn't put it in the right field, it was a problem. Same deal here. It is a big deal to get this right.
Yes.
You absolutely need to get this right. Otherwise, you're going to have a problem getting paid.
Yeah.
So if you're not sure, you need to talk to the insurance company. You need to be sure that you're doing this correctly.
Yes.
Otherwise, it could be a problem.
Yes. So, yeah.
Just wanted to clarify that off the top. That is what we're talking about here. She's talking about codes that you're going to put in. They are so many digits, numbers, letters, whatever they are. And they are for extremely specific things that you did, and they need to be proper.
Yes.
Okay.
And the Academy of Nutrition has a whole section on their website about billing. And so you're going to see the codes that I'm highlighting here are ones that you'll see on that reimbursement site. So if you are a member, there's a ton of information on there. But each insurance company also has medical policies and billing guides. One thing that you will need to do is sift through those to find the stuff that relates to dietitians. But it's a lot of good information, just if you're starting at a point where you don't know a lot about insurance and billing, which when I started, I had so many different resources and tip sheets everywhere because I didn't know what anything was. So.
Yeah, this is something that some dietitians pay someone to do their billing for them.
Absolutely.
I mean, it's kind of complicated.
It is.
That said, you can totally do it yourself.
Yeah. And some dietitians choose that, when they first get started, they take note of, they do the service and they take note of what they need to, but they hand it off to a biller. I went through the process of kind of learning. I wanted to learn it myself. And now it takes me like 10 seconds to submit a claim. So,
but you invested a lot of time into learning the way to bill properly.
Yes.
And you had some bumps in the road in the beginning.
Absolutely.
You had a rough time. Like, what were some of the big trials and tribulations you had early on with billing? Because I remember that being a sticking point several years ago for you.
Oh, yes. So when I first started, I used different platforms when I first started, and one of the first platforms I used was Office Ally, which a lot of dietitians use. However, if you don't really know a lot about billing insurance,
Office Ally, what is that?
Office Ally. It's I think they have a electronic record system or EMR on there too, but it's a way for you to bill insurance companies. And so basically, it gives you this blank form with all these boxes to fill in. Some are not relevant to dietitians. It's for literally all providers.
So I think that's a big sticking point, right?
Yeah.
You don't even know what's relevant to you because you're not a doctor, you're not a dentist or whatever. Like some of it's not going to pertain to you at all. Probably most of it in some cases.
No. And I was looking at it and I'm like, it's like admission dates and then it's, like the CPT code. I'm like, what is, and I'm Googling everything on this form. What has to get filled in? What's, what goes in this box or that box? What's a rendering provider? Just so many things I don't know what half the terms meant. So how do I know what to put in there? So
what got you through it?
So finding all different resources. So I think I downloaded every billing guide from every insurance company. I used the Academy resources. And then honestly, not necessarily everybody has this luxury, but I just kind of build and see what happens. And if a claim gets rejected, initially, you can, change it in the system if it gets rejected by the insurance company itself. So the insurance company gets what you submitted and they find that there's issues with it. They send you back this explanation of benefits and it'll, it usually has on there, what the issue was. So non-covered service, not billed proper, whatever it might be.
So there's some trial and error here. That sounds a lot like when I used to have to bill through corporate for like purchases too.
Yeah.
Like it would get kicked back and they'd be like, all right, what do you mean small equipment charge? Like there's a more specific channel that needs to go through, stuff like that. That makes sense. All right. So there was some trial and error involved for you.
Yeah.
Sometimes you would just send it off and hope for the best and see what happened.
See what happens.
Not the proper way to do it. Entertainment purposes only.
Not necessarily.
But that's what you did sometimes.
Yeah. And then I would call the insurance company. So I called quite a few times before I would bill to figure out. Sometimes they can't tell you, on the phone. They can't tell you how to bill necessarily. But if you do something wrong, they can kind of explain to you what was missing.
Why that doesn't work.
Yeah. And so that kind of helped narrow things down a few times too. So sometimes it is kind of trial and error in the beginning, and you can submit what's called corrected claims. So if you missed something or you did something wrong, most insurance companies have a process for submitting a corrected claim.
Okay. All right. Okay. Now that we have sort of a basic wow, I whistled super hard. Now that we have sort of a basic overview of what we're talking about here and what this even is. All right. Let's get back into digging into some codes. You're talking about CPT and G codes for a second, I think.
Yeah. So the CPT code. So I mentioned the 97802. So this is a common one that you would see. And this is, again, one of the main codes that dietitians would use for like medical nutrition therapy services. So the 97802 is the initial assessment face-to-face, and it's billed in units, which one unit is 15 minutes. And we'll talk a little bit about that in just a second. 97803 is basically a follow-up session. Again, face-to-face individual. And then there's 97804, which is for groups. So 2 or more individuals, and it's billed in 30-minute blocks. Those are the main CPT codes. The other thing is what's called G codes. These are for medical nutrition therapy. And these would be generally for like needing a second referral. So I've personally only really used these for Medicare clients. So there's a G0270 and then 271. So initial and basically follow up, or initial and then the group.
And they have to be billed. You can't just use the same one, even if it's for another. This will get kicked back to you at some point. Or you might get into some trouble down the road if it's discovered that you weren't coding this stuff properly.
Yeah.
I take it.
One thing I would say, and this is, even if you get paid for it and you weren't supposed to, it's not best practice. So try not.
Yeah, you gotta be careful.
Very
with
careful.
This stuff.
They can come after you even like months later from getting paid and retract payment. So
yeah, I take it you've heard some stories.
Yeah. So those are so again, the 97802 and 3 individual face-to-face initial and follow-up, 97804 group, and then the G codes 0270 is for an individual, and then the 0271 is for a group. I think I misspoke earlier, so I just wanted to clarify that.
All right, cool.
And then the ICD-10 is the other thing that you're going to want to know. So this is basically the international classification of diseases. And these are basically for healthcare diagnoses and procedures. So doctors use these, everybody uses these in healthcare. It's not just dietitians. But these describe basically the individual's disease or medical condition. So some of the ICD-10 codes actually require physician referral and diagnosis. So like chronic kidney disease, I can't diagnose that as a dietitian. It is one of the billable ICD-10 codes for dietitians with Medicare, but I need a physician's referral to have that. And then I bill the code because it's been referred to by a physician.
So if it's referred to by a physician, does that just show up somewhere? Like, how does that work?
So like for the actual referral itself?
Yeah, what's that entail?
So it depends on the system you use. When I first started, I actually had paper referrals. Now I have a HIPAA compliant fax, and so I get fax referrals occasionally.
Do you just attach that when you're billing?
It depends. So some insurance companies require you to submit it. Before it used to be online, you upload it. Now a lot of them are actually sent electronically. So I use another
right to the insurance company.
Yeah,
okay.
and then it just kind of pulled right in. Some other ones, they require you to have the referral on file, and then you would enter in the doctor's NPI number and who's the referring. And so it kind of depends on the platform you use in the insurance company, but most of them now use electronic referrals. So it's kind of just shows up in my system.
Okay, so that's not something that you necessarily need to like doodle with and control manually. It's kind of, in a sense, automated, or at least it's electronic, and there are ways to navigate it that aren't overly complicated. You don't have to have a bunch of papers flying around scanning stuff. It's not like that right now.
No. And even, most of the time when I'm working with clients and taking insurance, most of my clients don't require referrals. So their insurance covers for nutrition counseling without having a referral. So a lot of it's for like preventative. And so I mentioned like the ICD-10 code. And so the primary ones that I actually use for billing purposes, which again is going to vary by insurance plan, your state, all that kind of stuff, is Z713, which is basically dietary counseling and surveillance. It's the most general code. And then BMI codes. I usually bill for those, which, as a dietitian, I don't give much weight to the BMI itself, but it is a code.
Are we talking about BMI, like body mass index?
Yeah.
That's a billable code for insurance?
Yep.
What is that even for?
It's
what? Why?
Yeah, it's like listed on it's so outdated.
Wait,
yeah.
you bill based on a client's BMI?
Yeah.
Really?
Yeah.
Okay.
Mm-hmm. So like certain insurance, and this is like Medicare in particular, and this is actually not a code that you could bill for as a dietitian. I don't want to get into that because it's a little too complicated, but from like Medicare, they cover for like over a BMI of 30, which again, as a dietitian, we all kind of know that BMI is
all right.
Well, there, but yeah, dietary counseling and surveillance is my go-to code, Z713. It's probably I literally use that all the time.
Oh yeah, Z713. Yeah, I'm very familiar with that. Yeah, it's very interesting. Aha.
But if you're on the insurance company's website and you're looking at the medical policies, that's a great place to start to know what codes are accepted. Again, the CPT codes that I mentioned, you're generally going to find, and then also the ICD-10 codes. And again, we're going to link the information to the academy, and that'll be helpful to just get an idea of what generally the codes are for dietitians that they use.
Okay, so that's billing for your sessions.
Yes.
Specifically the time in the sessions, you bill it in units.
Yeah.
Did we talk about that?
Not generally. So I mentioned a unit. So one unit is generally 15 minutes. The Center for Medicare and Medicaid Services uses like what's called the 8-minute rule. So like one unit, I said is 15 minutes, but it's really the range from the CMS is like 8 minutes to 22 minutes. So if you had a client for 21 minutes, you would only bill for one unit. And your fee schedule is based on the units. So it shows you how much you are getting reimbursed per unit. And then, like a 1 hour session would be 4 units generally.
So this might be relevant to some people listening, but if you've ever had a job where you clock in and out and they do the 7-minute grace period for clocking in and out, if you clock in at 6:53 or 7:07, you're getting paid from 7 a.m. or 7 o'clock. And if you clock in from 7:08 to 7:22, it counts as 7:15.
Yeah,
it's sort of a 7-minute plus or minus thing, which it's the same for this. It's kind of a weird coincidence that that's the case, but that's a pretty common scenario if you've ever worked an hourly job where you clock in. So that's just as a reference point.
Yeah,
that's how this works as well. Interestingly enough, so. Can you bill insurance for like emails or stuff that you do between sessions with clients, meal plans, that sort of thing?
No. So generally speaking, and I can't, again, speak for all insurance companies, plans and whatnot, but generally speaking for what's billable is real-time interaction. So face-to-face, phone and video, which is, two that are sometimes just associated with what's going on right now. But some plans have it built in where like a phone session used to not be covered for some of my insurance companies, and now it is, which is nice. But it's the billable time is basically the time frame you are actually meeting with the client. So like emailing them, creating a meal plan, back end stuff that you might do isn't billable to the insurance company. Now, with that said, you might maybe have an add-on package. Maybe something like, I don't know, I'm just going to throw something out there, like $20 a month, for unlimited email, text check-ins, whatever it might be, where you might have like little add-on perks that aren't covered by insurance, but someone might pay out of pocket for. But generally speaking, no, you can't bill the insurance company for those things.
So with that add-on package, do you have that? Is that something you do?
So I have an add-on package that's a coaching package. And so the way I have it structured is the client gets a 120-minute phone consult and then unlimited text support and then email check-ins. So every week. And it's really helpful for my clients who need like the extra kind of motivation between the sessions, or I actually have a lot of clients who they use their insurance, they don't have any more visits left for the year, and they do this coaching package because it's a cheaper price point, but it's just kind of that I'm still kind of there.
Yeah, you're peppering it in, the emails and that sort of thing is pretty low maintenance for you.
Yeah.
And what is it, a 20-minute phone?
20-minute phone session. Yep.
That's not a huge commitment. And it's, a lot of this too, it comes down to like business. I mean, it's like these are clients, these are human beings.
Yeah.
A lot of it is like these are people that you care about. They're not just a name and some fields on a form for you. They're human beings that you care about. This is your passion. And that's a lot of what's going to help you carry yourself through the harder times with setting this up, with figuring out billing, with getting through the rougher spots of starting your private practice. You have to be passionate about this. Your heart has to be into it.
Yeah.
And that kind of package speaks of that. It's, when you think about how your rate is $180 per hour, but then it's like whatever per month.
Yeah. I have like a 65, I think I have it set to for the coaching.
Yeah. Which is like an insane value comparatively. And that's a lot of that is like if you have clients that have like 3 or 6 sessions a year and they use them, but they want to keep things up until those sessions get renewed. That's the perfect way to do that.
Yeah. And I don't charge, and this is something else to consider, is I don't charge for everything. I have clients who are insurance-based. They're not in like a coaching package or anything, but sometimes I always tell my clients, email me if you have questions. And normally people don't abuse that where they're like sending me bricks of emails every single day. Most of the time people check in with me, they ask me a question, they ask for a resource or, and so that's not stuff where I'm like, oh, that's 5 minutes of my time. So I'm billing, it's not like that. When you're in it and, a lot of the things that I've developed, like the packages or the services have been based on things that I've seen a lot of clients wanting, needing, asking for. And that's how I kind of develop and mold the services I have based on kind of what my clients are kind of asking.
And if you're generous with your time in a way that's not allowing people to abuse it, because generally people don't do that anyway, but if you do go out of your way for your clients and you do respond to emails and you do provide that extra bit of help and that bump in motivation and you're attentive between sessions and you're not like overly assertive with how you charge and that sort of thing, people are going to remember that.
Yeah.
You're going to get recommended to other people. Word of mouth is going to help you develop more business and drive more clients, and it's going to get paid back to you tenfold. I mean, it's only going to help you. People are going to remember that. And most of the time, people are going to have some pretty simple questions that don't really require you to like do a bunch of digging and research and going through your resources to answer. Usually it's like a quick email that you can just fire off in 30 seconds or like a minute and a half. It's not a huge time commitment for you to be attentive to clients via email between sessions. It's not a massive commitment that you would think, oh, I need to charge for this. This is a waste of my time. And if that's your attitude, frankly, I don't think you should be in private practice.
And there's
just me.
And there might be times where and I've only had this maybe a couple of times happen. Like I can probably count like 2 or 3, where I've had a client who was, I don't want to say a little much, but maybe emailing excessively, asking very lengthy, kind of in-depth things. And the way you respond to that can kind of help kind of bring that down a little bit. So you might say, these are great questions. Let's plan to talk about this at the next session. Or, you highlighted a lot of great points. Here's some resources in the meantime, but then let's cover this the next time we talk. So,
and frankly, some things are better suited to be had in the form of a real-time face-to-face or like verbal discussion rather than going back and forth via email, because that is sometimes not the most efficient method of communication for getting through complicated problems.
Yeah. I would say most of the time it's like emails and maybe I have a business cell phone number. So like I have a client who might text me and stuff like that. Most of the time it's not pretty lengthy. If anything, it's, people aren't calling me excessively or anything. It's, emails, which I can not respond to right away. Or again, just, hey, let's talk about this next time. Or, maybe we might need to move up the session. So that might be something where if they're emailing a lot, I might say, maybe would you consider like moving the session up a week or 2? It sounds like you might have a lot of questions and it might be helpful to maybe talk through them a little bit. And so, you can always pose it like that.
All right. So yeah, bit of a tangent there in terms of like what you don't bill for and kind of how to handle it. So setting fees for groups and classes. So if a company approached you to do a class or webinar, like how would you charge for that? What things do you consider when you're proposing a fee? That's probably, I'm assuming that's wildly different. And that's not generally the kind of thing you're going to get hit with when you first start out. But once you get into the business and you start your practice, you network more, you get more experience, you get more exposure. This may be something that you get approached for more and more by like local entities. There's kind of a lot out there for that.
Yeah. So there's the aspect of having like a webinar, going in and doing like our face-to-face seminar, cooking class, group classes, whatever it might be. But this is again why it's helpful to have like a base hourly rate, because that's where you could start from. What's my hourly rate? So if they want me to do a 1-hour webinar, here's my base rate. And then you kind of build on that. So if you're traveling somewhere, usually, I forget where I read this, but like 50 cents a mile was kind of like what I built in.
That's what a lot of like big companies do, like somewhere between like 30 and 50 cents or whatever it is per mile.
Yeah. So that's, if there's any parking fees, prep time and lesson development, you have to consider those things. So, like I might have a range, and this is going to look different for everybody, of like maybe $30 to $60 per hour that it takes me to create like a lesson or handouts. And just so I have an idea of like how long it's taking me. So if I have like a webinar or seminar that I've talked on the topic many times, it might only take me 30 minutes to tweak it versus like creating something from scratch. And then costs for like supplies, handouts, if you're doing like an in-person like demo, you might, think about food or supplies that you might need to have on hand. And you kind of add those, all up to give you like an actual proposal rate that you would then give to the company.
So you have to consider what things are taking you time, how much time they're taking. And I think, that's a good point too. If it's something that you're just rehashing and you want to be honest about, you don't want to pretend that you created something from scratch for this and then overcharge for it. If it's something easier for you, I mean, it helps to have some integrity here with this.
Yeah. And that's where you still have your base rate because it's still your time, but you might not charge as much as if it was like a completely new topic.
All right. So have you been hit by companies saying that, do this for free for exposure?
Yeah.
How do you deal with
Almost
that?
all the time. And it's actually a little bit less now than when I first started. And so it was, come to a webinar and we can hand out your business cards. And I actually did a ton of these when I first started. And then I was like, I'm kind of doing a lot of free stuff. So there's a couple ways to handle it. So the first is you want to actually think about, am I getting exposure and what does that look like? Like, are they putting your business cards in a pile in the corner where no one's going to see them? Or are they actively handing them out? Are you listed on like an internal website or out in newsletters? So you want to really think about like, am I getting exposure and is it to what kind of people? So, you might consider doing it to kind of get your name out there, maybe get in with a certain company who might be handing out your information to their employees. And maybe it's a company that you also accept the insurance that they have there. So it could be really great for you in terms of getting clients. Sometimes I've had companies before say, we'll promote you on our Facebook page. And then I'm like, let me check out their Facebook.
4 followers.
Literally, or they haven't posted in like a year and a half. And I'm like, so you want to just take a look at all those things, ask them what they mean by promotion, and get a clear idea of what that looks like to make a better decision based on if it's, helpful or not. And then you might do something and find, maybe you won't do it again. So learning.
That's a perspective that I'm sure is valuable in specification for dietitians and probably other forms of business. Now, I'm going to say this, doing something for exposure is kind of a meme online on Reddit. It's like huge. There are subreddits devoted to it's like r/for exposure or whatever, where like artists, musicians, graphic designers, like they get solicited hard for doing things for free. Oh, it'll be for exposure. I'm going to use it in my YouTube video that no one's going to watch, or like, stuff like that. Usually, I'm going to be real, across the board for this sort of thing. Maybe it's a little different for dietitians, but across the board, usually the answer is you shouldn't do it. I'm going to be real. It's like not really worth it. You're wasting your time. Most people don't have that kind of pull if they can't pay you.
Yeah, it really depends. And that's where like I presented a few times to companies, like did a free 15 or 30 minute, not pitch necessarily for myself, but like a little bit on like healthy eating. And it was kind of in a sense a pitch because I presented to actually nurses that worked in a facility. And so what the benefit was is that those nurses not only took their insurance plan was one that I accepted as a dietitian, but they also had clients that they referred to in the area. But the point of that presentation was for them to get to know me, for me to give my business card, but also the more comfortable I felt like they were with me, the more likely they were to refer me. And so I talked a little bit about nutrition and kind of had like an open discussion and talked about my services. So that kind of face-to-face interaction I felt like was worth it for me. But like health fairs and all that kind of stuff, I never do. I mean, there hasn't been obviously a lot right now, but I almost never do those anymore because they're...
You also have the advantage of accepting insurance, and most people have a private insurance plan. So there's kind of a way for people to use your services without paying out of pocket most of the time. See, that is the massive advantage that you guys have as dietitians, is that they're already paying for a service they're not using. All you're trying to do is have them connect the dots and realize you're just underutilizing your private insurance plan right now. You're already paying for this. I'm someone that can provide you this service at no extra cost to you.
Yeah.
That is a massive advantage to starting a business. It's crazy that you guys can do that. All right. We've gone on a lot of tangents on this one. So, all right. What if any tips for like negotiating your rate with, I guess, companies or insurance companies?
Yeah. So with companies in general, first you want to go into it knowing what your proposal is and like having kind of a breakdown of what those fees are, but know what you're asking for and maybe the base or lowest amount that you would accept. So,
don't start there.
Yeah, don't start there.
Negotiating 101. Start with a higher than you actually want and then go down from there. You want some room to negotiate down to. Know how much you actually want, mark it up like 10% or something.
Yeah. And know what you bring to the table. So the expertise, the credibility. But again, that's where it helps to have like a breakdown of what goes into building that rate or the proposal that you're giving them, because you want to know like, okay, well, if they're only going to give me back $100 and I'm looking for 500, then that's not going to cover this, and this. So, you might find it's not worth it. So.
Yeah, it helps to have those numbers and that hard data right there. If they try to lowball you and you can just straight up tell them, well, that's not even going to cover travel expenses, materials, like my normal rate for just seeing it, like this is nowhere near, like it helps to have those numbers already at hand. But that said, this, one thing with negotiation, just in general, is it's an uncomfortable conversation.
It is.
It is uncomfortable. It's just like negotiating the price for a car. You got somebody on the other end of the table who wants to give you as little money as they can get away with, and then there's you who wants to get as much money as you can get. And then you guys meet in the middle. Yeah. That's how it works. It's a negotiation. It's business. It's not personal, but you need to not be afraid to make some uncomfortable situations kind of crop up for yourself in order to get what you're worth.
Yeah.
It's going to be a little uncomfortable, but the more you do that, the more you get used to it. It can actually be kind of fun at a certain point, especially when you really know your value and you're okay to walk away. If you don't need something, it's like, whatever, buddy, you want to lowball me? See you never. And that, it helps when you can walk away.
Absolutely.
That said, don't be afraid to go after what you're worth. Don't be afraid to negotiate. If they try to lowball you, it can't hurt to say, all right, how about this much then? Well, I'll meet you halfway. Because I was going to, the people lie during negotiations. They lie like crazy. They're going to lie to you, lie right back to them. For entertainment purposes only here. This is purely for entertainment.
Just
lie your face off. Lie through your teeth. I got $1,000 for this 2 weeks ago, and you want to pay me $300? No way, man. I might go to $800 when really you only wanted $5. See? Tricky. Anyway, that's for like companies and stuff where it's open negotiation because they're going to try to lowball you.
They are. And
stick up for yourself.
Yeah. And that's where it helps to kind of have an outline of, what you're asking for and being clear, concise, having that ahead of time. Because I don't know how many times when I first started, I got into these conversations and I'm like, oh, I didn't expect them to ask that, or I didn't know what the lowest is, or,
That's going to come with experience.
Yeah, it comes
you can't
with
expect yourself to be an expert for your first one of these. Come on, you got to get your feet wet.
Yeah, get your feet wet and think about what you might do differently for next time. Take notes on that. That can be helpful for you kind of coming back to it again.
So the more you do these things and the more uncomfortable situations you end up with, the more conversations you have, the more times you fail with literally any of this stuff, not just negotiations, the better you'll be the next time around. It's only going to help you grow.
Yeah.
All right. That's with companies, not insurance.
Yeah. So for insurance, and we highlighted this a little bit earlier, that it can be really hard to negotiate rates when you are becoming a provider for insurance companies. But if you are able to negotiate with them, again, it might not be in that initial contracting phase, but you might start with maybe like a 5% increase, but they will ask you for very specific information. So they're going to ask for things like how long you've been a provider for them, the years in practice. They might ask how many patients you might see from them. And then other things that you might provide to like help support that would be like your specialties, any particular credentials or trainings, or maybe your geographic location. Maybe there aren't a lot of dietitians in your area. Maybe there's, limited dietitians with your specialty. So maybe you work with children and there's not a lot of pediatric dietitians and outpatient. And so those are all things that are things you can bring to the table that can help maybe get you an increase in rates.
So arm yourself with information. Be the expert. Know what you're talking about. That's going to be on you to do your research and get to know the field in your area and specifically what there is, and that's going to help you determine what kind of value. If you are in a highly specialized like sliver of dietetics that is underserved in your market, you're going to have a lot more room to negotiate there.
Yeah.
Arm yourself.
Exactly.
Have the information.
Yes. And it usually is going to be a process. So they're not going to just say, oh, we're going to increase your rates. You usually have to fill out some information and send them like a letter asking for what you would like. And then there's usually a negotiation phase where they come back to you with like a certain rate or percentage increase or whatever it might be. But being able to provide them with the information initially actually can help. That process can be very slow. So it can help with speeding that process a little bit too.
And I assume if they propose something, are you able to like counter propose higher and then...
You can. Some of them have, this is going to vary by insurance, but some just have like here's what we're going to, provide with. Like you give us your proposal, and then we take it back to whoever the people are, and then we come back to you with, this is what we could do. And then usually they might not budge from that. So it's up to you to say okay or nay. And,
So the major difference between negotiating increases in rates for insurance versus companies is that the insurance, negotiating it with insurance companies it's cold, it's mechanical.
Yeah.
There's not much human interaction there. It's kind of through email, and a lot of the people that are receiving your communication, they don't have direct control over what they can pay you. They're not the ones deciding it. There are just so many channels of communication that is going up and down a chain, and it's getting back to you as it is. Usually it's going to be a kind of a hard and fast thing where it's like that with a lot of big companies too, where it's not really a person's decision as much as it is a systematic decision.
Yeah. And again, there's sometimes time frames where they only do contract rate changes at certain times of the year or at certain points of your contract. So it's where it's good to know what that information is so you could be prepared and not miss it and have to wait 6 months or another year or so. So it's a lot different than negotiating for other stuff. So.
Yeah, much different. It's very much its own beast.
Yeah.
So if a company doesn't want to pay you what you ask for, is there a way to handle that? We kind of touched on it already a little bit, but
yeah, that's where you kind of have to decide, what's your lowest price point that you would accept. And then also, is this a company that you work with for other stuff? So is it something that you want to preserve the relationship with and maybe do something at a lower price point than you might do and maybe just not necessarily do a ton of business with them later? Or maybe it's something where you find that they are consistently lowballing you and not valuing your services, that you might want to kind of slowly, I don't want to say back away from maybe doing business with them. So you kind of reassess, and think about how they might treat you as kind of, in working with them, or if it's worth it to just kind of walk away at that point.
All right. So before we wrap it up, I want to circle back to one thing real quick that we skipped a little bit. And I think this is kind of important. So when setting your fees for private practice, should you consider how much you want to make in a year?
Yes, which personally I find that that's really helpful for getting an idea of what your goals might be. So, when you think about what you want to make in the year, that's obviously not necessarily what you're going to start off with in private practice, but you want to think about like your desired yearly income, but you want to factor in any kind of expenses. So business, personal, you got to account for things like taxes, maybe health insurance, all that kind of stuff. But once you kind of have an idea of what you would like to make in the year, you can divide that by then 12 months and get an idea of like a monthly income goal. And this could be really helpful, with self-pay, or group classes that you might do or webinars to kind of have an idea of like targets that you would want to aim for to help reach those monthly goals, or how many clients you might need to see to reach that. So it can be really helpful for planning purposes.
So open up an Excel spreadsheet, do a little bit of math, figure out your rate, how many clients you want to see, how many hours a week you'd like to work, and what kind of stuff you want to do, and sparse it out. See what a month or a week would look like to average out to a year of whatever it is you would like to set as your target yearly goal.
Yeah.
Which that's going to change over time. That's going to depend on if you're doing this part-time or full-time, if you have another job, what expenses are already covered, that sort of thing. That'll be very specific, but it will give you a good idea of how many clients you want to see and how the rate that you charge can change that and ultimately affect how many hours a week you need to devote to this. And, it can give you a big picture in terms of what kind of fee you should set and how many clients and whatnot.
Yeah. And when you're thinking about too, you want to think about not just how many clients you could see, but then the back end work. We talked about billable hours and all that, but like things you aren't able to charge for that you want to block in to kind of help maybe with planning. And then also, thinking about what's realistic to see in terms of clients per day. I have like a point where I figure out like, okay, more than this many clients in a day or in a week is just too draining. And, or I like the variety of having clients and classes. And so what does that look like to help me reach my, target goals for income? So that's where, you can kind of have a baseline understanding of that.
All right. So, I think we should wrap it up about here. We covered quite a bit here on setting fees, talking about stuff like your hourly rate, things to consider for setting that. We talked about one-on-ones and packages and working with companies. We talked a lot about some insurance stuff, digging into codes and whatnot, a few tangents here and there. And, negotiation, with companies and how it works versus them in insurance. There's a lot here to dig into. So this was kind of a heavy one,
Yeah.
but this is a pretty important topic, I think. You know, you guys got to be able to get what you're worth
Yeah.
and figure out how to get it,
Mhm.
right? There's a lot of technical stuff involved here. So, you know, I think it might be valuable for us to go through, like, we were thinking about doing a video for like a day in the life for
Mhm.
Felicia, where I just kind of follow her around for a day with a camera, like one of her busy days where she's teaching and seeing clients.
Mhm.
But then we could also maybe do an episode on how you stay organized and how you consider things, the way you block out your time, and kind of talk about, like, how you just talked about, you know, should you consider how much you want to make in a year? We don't have to go into like your target income per se, but like maybe look at some of the things that you use to determine what you do day to day or week to week and how you decide to block out time, how you view non-billable time, that sort of thing. There's a lot of opportunity to dig into this stuff more that I think would be valuable. If you're watching on YouTube and you're able to leave a comment, please do if you have anything you'd like us to dig into more in depth. But I think that'll do it for this one.
Yeah.
Thanks so much for being with us. You know, if you would be so kind as to rate the podcast on iTunes or Spotify or wherever you're listening, and possibly subscribe to the YouTube channel. We've been getting a surprising amount of traffic on YouTube lately, which is a good thing. And thank you very much if you've engaged with us on those platforms. But that is going to wrap it up here for Felicia Peraza of Peraza Nutrition and My RD Journey. Check her out on all the socials. Links to everything relevant here for resources that we talked about will be linked in the show notes or the description, so feel free to check that stuff out. And be sure that you do, actually, if you're going to dig into this stuff. Lots to learn here. But that'll do it for us. Any closing thoughts?
The only thing I just want to mention is, you know, this is obviously coming from my experience in my area. So a lot of what we talked about is hopefully going to give you a starting point to, you know, figure out what your rates might be, how to maybe develop all things in your practice. But again, you know, do what feels good for you, you know, and everyone's journey is going to look different.
You do you, boo. All right. Thanks so much for listening. Oh, God, I need to work on those whistling S's. Thanks so much for being with us, everyone. We will see you next time.